أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونشكره ونستعينه ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد محمدا عبده ورسوله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Assalamu alaikum everyone. So over the past day and a half, I know a lot of the conversations that we've been having, a lot of the talks, a lot of the lectures have covered a topic that is on all of our minds, which is the topic of Gaza and what is happening in Palestine, the topic of injustice, the topic of oppression. And you may be sitting here thinking, wondering, well, now we're talking about gender. How does that relate to the topic of injustice, the topic of oppression, or what is happening in Gaza? And we really can't have a conversation about gender without recognizing and understanding the societal constructs that surround the meaning that is made or the meaning that is derived from gender, and particularly from gender roles. When we look at what is happening in Gaza, we are consistently seeing women, mothers carrying their children. 70% of the population in Gaza who are women and children, we are seeing these women on the forefront fighting for their homes, fighting for their right to survive, fighting for their right to raise their children. Here in the US, in the protests that we see, on the front lines of the protests, we are seeing young women marching, standing up for oppression, standing up for injustice. We are seeing more young women today wearing the keffiyya proudly, wearing upon their hijab a symbol of that which they stand beside against oppression, against injustice. And when we look to traditional historic movements in our past, we see women at the forefront in so many situations. We know that Nusayba radiallahu anha, one of the female companions of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, it was said that in battle, everywhere the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam would turn, he would find Nusayba shielding him in that battle. We see that the first martyr in Islam, not just the first female martyr, but the first martyr was a female, Sumayya radiallahu anha. And so when we talk about gender, and we talk particularly from the female perspective, we need to understand the richness in our Islamic heritage, the richness of what it means to be a woman, and how being a woman does not fall under the societal constructs, the misnomers of one who is oppressed, one who has no voice. Many of us still recall during the Trump election, during the Trump bid for presidency, when he asked a woman, a Muslim woman, whether or not she could speak or if only her husband could speak for her. This is not our deen when it comes to understanding gender roles and who we are. Years ago, when the Arab Spring was rising in so many of the countries in the Middle East, many women were at the forefront of those initiatives. And we saw a woman from Yemen named Tawakkul Qarmain, who was given the Nobel Peace Prize for leading many of the initiatives in the Arab Spring. And when she received that Nobel Peace Prize, many of the journalists turned to her and commented on her hijab. And they said, "You have just received one of the highest honors. Don't you think you should remove what it is that you're wearing?" And she responded by saying that if you look back in civilization, it was the removal of clothing that indicated a lack of civilization. And it was as people put on more clothing that greater civilization was established. And she said, "My clothing today as a Muslim woman represents the highest form of civilization, and it is the removal of clothing that is a regression in terms of civilization." This is what it means to be a Muslim woman, to carry our faith as our identity and not to fall into the pitfalls of gender that is defined by societal constructs. Many of you may have recently watched a documentary that came out last year, I believe, called What is a Woman? And in that documentary, Matthew Walsh, who was looking to understand the answer to this question, what is a woman? He was faced over and over again with very strange responses. People saying, well, you can't really define what a woman is. People saying, well, I think a woman is whatever you feel like. If you feel like a woman, then you are a woman. This shift in terms of the understanding of the biological reality of the way that Allah has created us is indicative of postmodern thought in which there is no absolute truth. But again, this is not our deen. We know that there is an absolute truth, and Allah is al-haq. He is the truth. And it is Allah Azza wa Jal who determines who we are biologically. But so often we see the societal construct entering into our lexicon and the way that we view male and female. And in so doing, we begin to push on many thought processes that may be developed from a patriarchal approach, that may be developed from a power struggle that comes back to human desire and not at all what Allah has decreed. And this is why today we are seeing so many of our youth struggling with gender identity. We are seeing this rise of non-binary gender, gender non-conformists, utilizations of pronouns like they and them instead of he or she. And we see that the process of changing language and the way that we talk about things can impact the way that we see the world. The theory of sociolinguistic relativity tells us that our world develops meaning, not inherently, but from the words that we use to describe it. And I will give you an example. Years ago when I was in middle school, and this was back in the 80s, there was a song that we would sing on the playground, and the song essentially was, I'm so happy today, I'm so gay, I'm so happy today. And when I would tell my children or tell my students this song, they would be appalled because the meaning of gay, the denotative meaning, the dictionary definition of happy has been co-opted and connotatively utilized to now describe a sexual orientation. And in the changing of words, in the changing of the way that society views a gender, views the concept of gender identity, we now move from the idea of cisgender, simply being binary, male or female, to the conceptualization of gender as a spectrum. And this is a problem. Because when we step away from the understanding of who we are, from the perspective of the way that Allah has created us, and we instead begin to assign definitions to who we are based on society, based on the hawa, the whim that changes, then nothing is rooted in truth anymore. Nothing is stable. Sheikh Abdullah earlier mentioned the verse in the Quran in Surah Ali Imran, that when the mother of Maryam alayhi salam gives birth to her child, she turns to Allah. And she makes that statement, the verse in the Quran, that the male is not like the female. And yet we see that Allah Azza wa Jal responds to the mother of Maryam, and He accepts Maryam onto His service. Because the mother of Maryam knew that from societal context, the male was not treated like the female. The male could grow up in a temple in the mihrab and study the monotheistic religion, and the female could not. Society at that time would denigrate the female and would evaluate the male. And so when the mother of Maryam, knowing this, knowing that she had made that sincere dua, that she would dedicate what was in her womb to the service of Allah, and she gives birth and it is a male and not a female, she turns to Allah. And Allah, knowing her sincere desire that her daughter, that this female would be raised in a way where she could be a woman of faith, where she could be raised studying and learning and practicing monotheistic faith, Allah accepts her onto His service. And yet today, so many times, we fall prey to societal constructs. We tell our girls that they have to be educated, that they have to be smart, that they have to work in this way, that they have to do ABC, but they also have to be the best mother, the best baker. They must bake the best mahshi. They must cook the best biryani. They must raise their children. And yet we raise our boys with a different standard. And we tell our boys, get educated and work. And so oftentimes what we see is that we raise our girls like boys and yet expect them to still fulfill the duties of what it means to be a female from a cultural or societal perspective. And we raise our males as males rather than as partners, rather than as those who will grow together with their spouses, rather than those who will be role models, who will walk in the footsteps of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who recognize that yes, there are biological differences between the male and the female, but that Allah Azza wa Jal in the Quran in Surah Al-Ahzab reminds us that it is the believing men and the believing women, that it is the fasting men and the fasting women, that it is the men who guard their chastity and the women who guard their chastity. It is the men who pray and the women who pray. It is the men who do good deeds and the women who do good deeds that will surely be rewarded based on the merit of their deeds. This is what the definition of humanity is. And when we get so caught up in societal constructs related to gender, we lose sight of who we are as human beings. Yes, males and females are different because Allah has created us biologically so. Yes, males and females have different attributes, different characteristics. Males and females have different ways of worshiping Allah. But males and females both have the rights that Allah Azza wa Jal has granted them as human beings. Males as females both have voices. Males and females in our rich Islamic heritage have consistently worked together to grow the ummah and to recognize the roles that Allah Azza wa Jal has decreed for them, not the roles that society has dictated. There's a famous feminist by the name of Gertrude Stein who once said, in trying so hard to be the best women we could be, we have become the men we want to marry. And there is a lot of truth in this statement, because when we look today at the confusion of our youth, the struggles they have because they've grown up in a household maybe where they've constantly been told, you are a girl, you can't do that, or you are a boy, you're expected to do this, and those responses of that and this are not rooted in the Quran, are not rooted in the guidance that Allah has given us, it becomes problematic. And so the female shies away from her essence as a woman, and the male shies away from his essence as a male because of societal definitions that paint them in a corner. But the female is meant to be a scholar, a student, a mother, someone who gives back in her community, a doctor, a businesswoman. And the male is meant to be a student, a scholar, a business person, a doctor, anything that brings that benefit to society. And neither male or female is meant to be restricted as long as they are following the guidance of Allah, as long as they are following the sunnah of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as long as they are rooting their definitions in answering the question of who am I to the understanding that I am a Muslim trumps I am a woman, trumps I am a man, trumps I am a male, I am a female. It trumps the gender fluidity and the gender non-binary and the gender non-conformist approaches that we are seeing today. So please, brothers and sisters, let's start in our own homes. Let's start with raising our females with strength of iman, with strength of understanding who they are and how they have been blessed by Allah to be female. Let's start in our own homes with our males. Let's raise our sons to recognize their value and their worth and the beauty of Allah creating them in who they are. And let's raise our daughters and sons to support one another rather than to turn against one another. Jazakumullahu khair.